Hi, everyone. My name is Amara Coley. I'm head of customer success here at Horizon 3. We're really excited to kick off Cybersecurity Awareness Month with a first in our series of webinars where we're going to be highlighting a lot of the latest and greatest. This webinar features lessons from the front lines, Dynatrace's journey with NodeZero. We're going to talk about one of the newest features, AD tripwires, and how you can use this to proactively defend your AD environment. A few things here. So Dynatrace is a multinational observability platform, and they've been partnering with us for a number of years now, really driving remediation at scale. Eric, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric. I am Senior Customer Success Manager here at Horizon 3, and really looking forward to diving into the presentation today and covering all things AD tripwires, as well as discussing the journey around Dynatrace and our special guest, Dustin Kirkpatrick.
Excellent. To start, let's share a little bit about the agenda for today. So we're going to kick off with a little bit of a customer story, just to give you some perspective of what we can drive with using Active Directory tripwires, and then we're going to show you a little bit about how you can use this in action. So you can go from Active Directory to actively defending your environment. Then we're going to talk risk in a live panel featuring Dustin, myself, and Eric. And want to let you know this is meant to be interactive throughout. So please feel free to ask questions at any point in time. All right. First off, let's talk about the significance of this new feature that we've developed. One, 90% of enterprises worldwide use Active Directory. But in fact, 50% of organizations have experienced 80 attacks in past years. So there's really a need to defend your environment, but it's all about how. The challenge that we're seeing, we have customers who are looking for a way to more proactively detect what's happening in Active Directory, knowing that it's a prime target, but you need to find a way to detect early compromise. And so we've provided a ability for you to use these decoys seamlessly within your environment. So with AD tripwires, you can extend the power of our trust platform to give you deeper visibility into your Active Directory environment. Customers are using this to integrate this into your other solutions as well. So whether it's Microsoft Sentinel, but the goal here is that you're blending seamlessly into your blue team's existing workflows. So the results are Active Directory tripwires can give you a powerful layer of defense, providing high fidelity, early warnings of compromise, reinforcing compliance, and amplifying the effectiveness of your red team. We've got a great quote here from today's customer, Dustin Kirkpatrick. Active Directory tripwires gives us an early warning system and the part of our environment attackers care about most. It's low effort, high impact, and makes our entire defense strategy stronger. Okay, so a little bit about Active Directory.
You want me to cover this, Amara?
Go ahead.
Awesome. So Active Directory Tripwire is really a great a tool in your toolkit, kind of enhancing what we're already doing with our NodeZero tripwires. Tripwires as a whole, they're meant to be a canary token, or many of us are familiar with honey tokens, and they allow you to deploy, decoys within your environment. And with AD tripwires, we're perfectly camouflaging them amongst your other Active Directory accounts. They are customizable, so you can make sure their naming convention is designed to be similar to the rest of your environment, so they're irresistible to attackers. And they're meant to be invisible alarms. I mean, anytime you have someone interacting with an account that is a decoy, you would want to know about that. We actually went through the process with Dustin recently, and that afterwards they were moving some things around just to make sure that they had the new accounts that we had created organized based on their conventions. And even that simple touch point, caused an alert to go off, and you want to make sure that any interaction with these types of tripwires is triggering an alert. Now, of course, they were able to quickly mark that as a false positive due to the nature of the action, but being able to have that invisible alarm around accounts that are meant to be appealing to attackers is absolutely amazing within any environment. And of course, after the setup, you have 24/7 monitoring on those Active Directory accounts, and it doesn't require any privileged, very minimal privileged access It's very easy to set up. We really ran into only minor issues with setup with Dustin just around the initial configuration, but that was very quickly remediated, and we were able to get it resolved within just minutes. And we were able to get him up and running in just a few minutes afterwards. So ongoing support around NodeZero tripwires in AD is going to be a powerful tool in all of our customers' toolkit going forward.
Excellent. So a couple things here.
As far as,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Amara.
So a couple things I want to highlight here. So we're essentially trying to develop solutions that will really meet our customers where they are. We know that 90% of global Fortune 1000 use Active Directory. 50% of these organizations have experienced an attack in their AD in the last 2 years. 73% of ransomware attacks involve Active Directory compromise. So the goal here, and what you're going to continue to hear about in this webinar, is that you can do something about it. It's really about focusing your efforts where it matters the most and where attackers are primed to target your environment.
When it comes to any kind of environment, and especially AD, typically it's really tough to secure. I mean, Active Directory is a primary target for anyone coming into an environment, and oftentimes the misconfigurations are unavoidable in some situations, just depending on legacy systems that you have in place that require on older configurations or older authentication types. And oftentimes AD attacks can go undetected or invisible for quite some time. So having accounts that are enticing, that would be interacted with by really anyone coming into the network if they are looking to gain some sort of lateral movement, having that detection in place is extremely critical. I mean, here we have some statistics. 85% of orgs have over permission users within their environment, and around 56 percentage of orgs have some sort of misconfiguration or something that's in place due to legacy legacy systems in the environment that rely on those types of misconfigurations. So very critical in any environment in this day and age. So Active Directory tripwires, looks like, I think we may have gone over this earlier in the slideshow.
Let's see, what is...
We got a couple duplicate slides.
We might have, yeah.
There we go. There we go. That's what we want. So AD tripwires, it's really, AD in itself is a biggest risk in most environments. And typically, we want to make sure that you're monitoring those as closely as possible. So this type of tripwire is specifically meant to catch attackers that are going to be targeting those critical infrastructure around Active Directory users, and of course, some of the most common targets, and as well as some of the invisible techniques that are leveraged against Active Directory users. When it comes to just making sure that you are getting clear and concise alerts, that's really what we aim to provide with tripwires as a whole. But Active Directory tripwires builds on that to make sure that you're getting concise explanations anytime there's an event or some sort of attack that's taking place within the environment targeting those Active Directory users. Active Directory tripwires also embeds seamlessly into the rest of NodeZero and the tripwire product. And of course, there's no interruption or disruption with any of your existing workflows that you have in play today.
Excellent. So a few things of how you can get started with AD tripwires. Number one, check your requirements. Ensure you have domain admin privilege and access to your NodeZero runner. Two, we're gonna, during this webinar, we can drop a few documentations in the chat for anyone who'd like to get started today. But you can follow the Get Started guide to start creating your tripwire accounts and agents. Next, you're gonna enable monitoring. So use the configuring domain policy to guide active detection. From there, you're going to verify the operation is successful, test the system, and ensure everything is working correctly. And then finally, we recommend that you disguise tripwires. After provision, apply non-privileged persona attributes so the decoy accounts blend in. All right, let's talk risk. So we're excited to have joining us today Dustin Kirkpatrick, Senior Information Security Analyst at Dynatrace. Dustin has been partnering with Eric, a CSM on my team, and he's been one of the earliest adopters to this new feature. So we have a few questions here, and I'm sure that there are going to be questions from the audience as well. But to kick us off, Dustin, how about you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your journey into cybersecurity and your time at Dynatrace as well.
Sure. So I'm Dustin Kirkpatrick. I'm a Senior Information Security Analyst for Dynatrace. I've been here for a couple years now. Originally, I got started in the tech industry like I'm sure a lot of people did. I started at Best Buy doing Geek Squad stuff, and then kind of progressed from there to doing tech support at Indiana University. Did that for a long time, and then transitioned, got my master's in cybersecurity, and transitioned to working at UConn for a couple years, doing as kind of a blue team for their cybersecurity program, for coming to Dynatrace in this kind of hybrid purple team role that I work in now.
Excellent. And Eric, would love for people to hear a little bit of your journey with Horizon 3.
Yeah, sure. So I got my start in IT about 12, 13 years ago, working web hosting. I did that for several years, and then moved over into compliance in the security realm. And I was working compliance primarily on DoD for roughly 5 to 6 years before just having a bit of an urge to move over to the technology industry proper. And that's when I got my start into offensive security. I worked for a pen testing as a service company for about 2.5 years before moving over to Horizon. And I've been here for about the last year and a half, and it's been a fantastic journey so far.
Awesome. And one thing I want to highlight, so Eric has been Dustin's CSM, and he's really given Dustin a lot of proactive guidance and ways that they can really make the most of what they're seeing with their NodeZero results. Really, really grateful for Dustin's time today, being an early adopter and several of our newer features here at Horizon 3. To kick us off, the first question I have for you, Dustin, is tell us about the first pen test you ever run with NodeZero. What did you find? And what did you do?
Yeah, so we went through a couple of proof of concept pen tests that were very small and isolated. We didn't find too many things, but kind of things that showed what we were expecting. After we had it configured, we ran like our first full environment pen test to see what we could get, and I think it was really eye-opening. I think one of the things that you run into with a lot of pen tests is, usually your engagements with an external company are something like 2 weeks, and so they have the options to either go in depth or to dive deep into a single thing or give you breadth. One of the things that this was really useful for was the fact that it was able to go in very deep while giving us, kind of a whole gamut of our environment. So we did find we had an AD compromise off of some legacy tech system that we had. We were, as soon as we saw that, we went through, got that resolved. That's no longer a vulnerability, fortunately. But it was one of those things where, if we had like an external engagement, they may not have seen that bit of tech because they're looking somewhere else. So it was that kind of thing that we were able to get through and see that was really nice with our first full pen test.
Excellent. So what did you do? What did you do after the first pen test? What's your process?
Yeah, so it's probably pretty standard. Sort of go through, look at the findings, and then anything that NodeZero, and then I go through and look at anything that we both I agree is kind of a critical finding, right? So NodeZero, of course, goes through, rates everything critical, high, medium, low, whatever, and I look at the things that maybe it says are medium, but to me they're a bit higher just based off of what we would call our crown jewels or anything like that. I go through those, but then we assign to the given team that is responsible for what that given asset is and try and have them remediate it, especially with the criticals. One of the things that's really nice with NodeZero is it does give the proof of concept for the finding, right? It shows you how it compromised the system. So I can show them exactly this, as opposed to something that's kind of theoretical where it says, oh yeah, it's just got this vulnerability. I can say, hey, it's got this vulnerability. Look at exactly how we were able to compromise it. And that usually gets them to jump on it. So like with that, that piece of legacy tech, it was gone a day after we found the compromise, right? It was like, hey, look at this. And they're like, oh, turned it off, and there it went.
That's pretty impressive. How do you get people on board? So when you're going to different teams, I'm sure you probably have different access, different provisioning protocols internally, but how do you get other teams on board?
On board into like the NodeZero environment, or just on board with the remediation process?
With the remediation process.
Really, it's just showing them the proof of concepts, right? So, or showing them what the issue is and how we got there. So, a lot of times, Dynatrace has got different departments that work on their different labs for the development of our product, as well as our general sort of internal corporate structure. So we go through, and I'll have a conversation with them, show the proof of concept. Usually it's trying to build out all of the data that they will need to make it as easy as possible, which, NodeZero helps with a lot. It'll show a vulnerability. It'll show what the best remediation steps are, plus the proof of concept. So I build that all into the ticket, have the conversation with them. And a lot of times, the fact that I'm giving them all of the information up front helps with the buy-in, because they don't have to go do their own research. They can just say, hey, we've done the things you told us to do. Can you double check it?
Excellent. So it sounds like proof and having that proof at your fingertips is really kind of like the evidence that you need to have the right conversations and get change to happen within your organization.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate.
Okay, next question I have for you. Let's talk about your experience in the early adopter program for AD tripwires. What got you started, and what did you find as you went through that process?
Well, we started with the regular tripwires, but I generally like the idea of having that sort of canary token sitting in your environment, right? Something that can point to a system compromise or point to wanting to look a little bit deeper into a given issue, determine whether or not it's a bad actor in your environment, or if it's just, somebody goofing around where they shouldn't, maybe. So having it also embedded into the AD environment was just kind of a no-brainer. And then the configuration, was pretty simple. So, the fact that it didn't require too heavy of a lift for us to be able to get it up and running really made it easy to go through. We didn't have to have a long, drawn-out process internally of trying to figure out, is this something that we can do? Is it too is it too invasive in our system or anything like that?
Excellent. So we do have a couple questions from the audience. Let's see.
Would you like me to go over those real quick, Amara?
Yes, thanks, Eric.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I've answered a couple, but I'd like to go over them with the audience as well, just because they're great questions. So thank you so much for sending those in. So the first one is let's see here. Are we working on doing this for AD and Entra, or just AD? And at the moment, we are actually just targeting AD, but we do have plans to pivot into the Entra environment as well with AD tripwires. But at the moment, AD tripwires is Active Directory only. Dustin, if I'm not mistaken, we discussed this a little bit during our initial call. Do you see a lot of value with moving this into Azure? I mean, obviously there is, but would that be something that you feel would be beneficial in your environment as well? Do you have a pretty big Entra presence?
Yeah, and I think you'll find that a lot of companies are moving more and more to Entra as kind of the default. The on-prem AD stuff is, I'm not going to call it legacy tech yet, but that definitely seems to be where the environments are moving. So it just makes
Definitely
sense
agree.
to also include that.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question we've got, it says, how would this help with role-based permissions or over-permissioned users? Directly, not as much as you would think. I mean, it definitely does, but when you have Active Directory users that are meant to appear as over-permissioned users, or maybe something that could potentially be affected by misconfiguration, you're going to have adversaries target those types of accounts. So passively, this would definitely help in those environments that might have over-permissioned users, whether directly or passively, but definitely does help in that regard. And when it comes to just detecting over-permission users in general, we definitely have tools in place for that. Things like our AD password audit, and honestly, our tests in general are very good about highlighting over-permissioned users. With our various tools, whether it be as part of our poisoning attacks or our AD password audit as well. So definitely a lot of tools in the toolkit for users in general, and AD tripwires will just be enhancing that. Let me see
I
here.
think, Eric, to build on that, so
Yeah.
it's definitely a great question, and I just want to emphasize to the audience to think of this as an overall platform where there's many different solutions depending on what you're actually trying to solve. So with AD tripwires, think of this more for detecting and alerting, giving that early warning before something becomes an incident. But when you're thinking about over-provisioned users, I'd probably look at other tools. Maybe you can also highlight other things they could do within our platform, Eric, that might get them to address that particular use case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as mentioned, we do have something like our AD password audit. That is a great way of just detecting those user accounts that might have weak or default credentials, or using credentials that might be part of a breach list. So identifying those that might be susceptible to an attack is something that is a great tool in the toolkit. We also have our insider threat pen test, which is meant to be, you can think of it as a credentialed pen test, but leveraging different user groups as part of that, so you can understand what different user groups have access to within the environment is extremely helpful as well. So those would be the two that I'd definitely recommend when it just comes to user accounts as a whole, and understanding what the impact is, just both from a credential standpoint, but also from a permission standpoint.
Excellent. The questions keep coming. What else we got?
Yeah, we've got some great ones. Let's see here. How should we ensure lateral movement is detected in an environment before any operation? And secondly, how to ensure credential dumping is detected?
I actually
I
want
think
to
this is
pass this one over to,
honestly,
I want to pass this over to
yeah,
Justin. How would you like to answer this?
Me. So I'll back up a little bit to the second question. Building off of that, one of the things that NodeZero was able to do, right, is see that this legacy account that we had was an over-permissioned user. That's how it got into the AD compromise. So yeah, that's not something that the canary tokens or the tripwires are going to do necessarily. But that's definitely something that's well within the purview of the NodeZero platform itself. Ensuring lateral movement is detected in an environment. I think that depends on your environment. I mean, one thing is your AD controls, the way that you have things implemented in your AD environment. You should be able to see when, you should have some sort of active alerting system for when an account is a privileged account is being accessed to do a privileged thing. That's something that we have implemented in our system. I don't know necessarily that that's something that I would see NodeZero doing, except to say that NodeZero, again, when you run a pen test, will point out those over permissioned users when they make that sort of lateral movement. So, it's kind of the thing that you have to think about when it comes to a pen testing system is you're not being necessarily you're not being reactive in a pen test situation, right? This is a system that is used to proactively fix issues by identifying them internally. So ensuring lateral movement is detected is something that you need to have built into your active defensive systems, like something like Sentinel or anything like that.
Yeah, and this does highlight. I was about to say, do you want to talk about EDR efficacy real quick?
Yeah, that was where I was going. So one thing I will add to that, Dustin, that was a great kind of real world example, and it's always just great for customers to share some of the processes that they're improving as well. So it's not always just going to be about the tool itself, but it really is what processes you have in place and how you're configuring the other tools. So one of the great use cases for NodeZero is that controls validation and giving you early insight into maybe some things are not as effective as possible. That might be Sentinel. That is, it could be also CrowdStrike, whatever your EDR tool in place is, but giving you that insight into are things actually alerting or is that missing things? And then once you have that insight, what do I then do? So that's actually perfect segue because we have another webinar coming up on the 15th where we're going to explore exactly that, how you can do essentially a health check on your endpoint security tools.
Yeah, EDR efficacy is a great new tool in our platform that will be part of any report, and it's meant to highlight exactly what we'll be discussing later this month. So be sure to stay tuned. Let's see here. There's actually a question for Dustin specifically. Had you attempted to implement other canary tokens before? Not sure if they're referencing other types of tripwires or maybe other technologies outside of NodeZero.
Yeah, and I see that there's a follow-up that is how is the implementation compare between Horizon and other systems. So not using third-party vendors, I've definitely set up like honeypot systems before and other things that are kind of similar along those lines, right? In our environments that then have the active alerting of why are you touching the system, and it comes back to us, and then we try and resolve it. So I would say one of the differences is I have not previously done these holistic systems, or I've previously done whole system honeypots where it's or sinkholes where they're just sitting there in the environment and they're relatively untouched, but not the way that Tripwires is implemented, right? So some of the technologies that the current Tripwire system uses is like AWS credentials sitting on a system that is otherwise in use, but this particular AWS credential is not. So if this AWS credential gets used, it gets flagged. Or these AD tripwires where it's, these specific accounts that are configured in a way to be a juicy target that I had not done before. What I will say is the implementation for both of those is pretty simple, right? It is click a button in NodeZero that says drop tripwires, and the pen test runs. It finds a system. If it has access to it to drop a tripwire, it goes ahead and does it. If not, it's queued up into a thing where I can go and enter credentials and then have it run the job. So if I find something that I would say is a high value system in our environment that NodeZero has seen before, I can get the credentials for it, drop a tripwire, and then that goes into our active alerting system, which we have, configured with Sentinel for alerting to our EDR system. And then the AD configuration, like Eric talked about, it took us about an hour to configure it for 3 different accounts that had different kinds of permissions. And then we were up and running. So it's pretty simple.
Awesome. Let's see here. There's a couple of other questions that we have in the Q&A. The first one is there a roadmap to add this tripwire for GWS? So we have, full plans of making sure that tripwires are full feature parity across all of our offerings. When it comes to what tripwires is available for, typically tripwires are available in our Pro package as well as our Elite package. And it looks like, this particular type of tripwire will be available generally very soon. We can definitely make sure that we have a roadmap date published for this type of tripwire. Currently, it is available for all customers in our commercial offering with Pro and above, and we have plans to have full feature parity across the board in our other environments as well. Let's see here. Are there any plans to work on OWASP top 10 testing or do pen testing on web apps? This is a question that we get all the time. And we actually do already cover the majority of the OWASP top 10. A lot of what you see in the OWASP top 10 is primarily on the network or base application layer. So a lot of that is reachable by our tool. So we already covered the vast majority of that. You can think, like things like cross-site scripting and all of the major items in OWASP is already covered. As far as web app pen testing, though, we are currently planning on releasing web app pen testing in the future. It's actually already currently under development, but I'm sure we'll have plenty of news around that moving forward. Nothing in depth about that today. Let's see here. No other questions in the Q&A. Amara, do we have any other general questions we'd like to ask Dustin or?
I do. And I also have some questions for the audience, but first I have a question for you, Dustin. The question is around time to value. So one of the things I frequently hear from customers is there just is not enough time in the day. And sometimes this will make a big difference between people, trying out new features, trying out entirely new solutions entirely. Like, can you help me understand what is time to value for you? What do you look for when you're either considering new solutions or new ways of working? And what's most important for you? And what have you seen with NodeZero?
Sure. So I think one of the big things that's been incredibly useful about NodeZero is that it is essentially a workforce multiplier, right? Normally, the kinds of pen tests that I run with it would be something that I would probably want a more dedicated team to do, like not just a solo pen tester, especially again with the breadth and depth that it's able to do. So it's one of those things where running a pen test on this gives me a lot of ability to go do other things while it's doing the automated tasks, and then I can come back and look at the results. So the time to value was essentially that first pen test. We showed immediately that there's gaps in our systems that we had previously not been able to see. As for the kind of the rollouts to the newer things, like Eric mentioned kind of at the top, like after we rolled out the 80 tripwires, 2 days later, one of our 80 admins, the one who had worked on rolling it out with me, she was moving them into the proper areas in our environment, and we got the alerts, and so it was immediately like, hey, this is doing the job that it's assigned to do. So I think one of the big things that Horizon's been really knocking out of the park with NodeZero and its offerings is the ease of use to everything. Like it takes very little to get everything up and running after you've got it configured. So yeah, does that answer that?
No, it definitely does. I believe you got started with as an early adopter of this particular feature, 80 tripwires, about a month ago, and you shared that And about 3 to 4 days after you got the alerts, you were able to work with your AD team. Help us understand a little bit about how did you, when you got the results and you went over to the AD team, like how did they react?
Oh, I mean, it was one of those things, we got the alerts in Sentinel, and I was just like, hey, are you doing this? And she was like, oh, yeah, I probably should have told you. It was like, it's okay. This was just like a training exercise for us to see how quickly we were on the ball, which, was in a matter of minutes. She had just finished working on one account and was starting on the other when all of the alerts were coming through our system. So they do the job, and if you have that, one thing I'll say is if you're just relying on NodeZero alone, then maybe you would have to be getting the email, or you'd have to have the alerting configured there. But really utilizing the connectors that that Horizon 3 has been developing for them specifically. Again, like we use our EDR is Sentinel. It's plugged into there. So any alerts that come through anything from NodeZero immediately hit our EDR, and we're alerted through that, as well as the NodeZero emails. So I'm sure the AD admins also got the emails and were like, oh yeah, there you go. So.
Excellent. I have a question for our audience, and just in seeing some of the themes and questions that were coming up. Question for everyone who's dialing in: what systems or environments are you looking to secure, and where do you see gaps in your existing detection coverage? For anyone who would like to answer, please leave a comment in the Q&A. Share a little bit about the systems and environments that matter the most to you.
And also, with this being Cybersecurity Awareness Month, of course, Dustin, do you have any, whether it's lessons around your use of NodeZero, or even in general, do you have any lessons learned or anything that you'd like to share with the industry as a new best practice for you and your team, or just something for folks to internalize?
It's a good question. So I would say probably it's when you're trying to do remediation for any of these threats, right? One of the things that happens a lot of times is that you give too little information to whoever is responsible for whatever system needs to be remediated, to where it feels like way more of a chore to get the job done. So rather than talking about the stats that everybody knows, I would say, be thorough in your ticketing. So that when you go to somebody who, say, owns an Apache server that's running something out of date and it needs to be updated, you hit them with, hey, I know our environment, this is what you're running, this is how you need to resolve this. And then that way they don't have to do a lot of the legwork of, hey, that you do the legwork for them within your job as the cybersecurity analyst, rather than just pointing out the vulnerability and hoping that, some sysadmin or somebody whose primary job is in development is going to try and figure it out. That's the way that we work, and it's been hugely successful at Dynatrace. So.
No, that's fantastic. I think there's a phrase that goes really well with that, which is lead with why. And it's just telling them what to fix, what to remediate, and tell them to patch it, tell them why it's important, and give them as many details as you can around the task. And it's much more likely to get buy-in if you're leading with why and making sure that you're providing that context. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'll say too, it also allows things to be more conversational, right? If I come up to somebody, I'm like, hey, this is broken, you need to fix it, then it's directive as opposed to conversational. If I'm like, hey, this is broken, this is what I've seen, I went ahead and looked at all this stuff, this is the common way to remediate it or to do the update or whatever, then you can have a conversation. They can talk about the specific needs of the system, maybe why they have or have not already done that. So it informs you a little bit more about your environment, but also, they're more likely to respond positively when you show that you've put in the effort than not.
Awesome. That's great. Alex, I've gotten a couple responses to your question, Amara. It looks like Okta is one that is on a lot of folks' mind, and of course AWS and Andra, which you already have a bit of a presence in, and of course GCP, the other big cloud provider out there. So definitely things that are on our minds as well. I'm not sure if we have any immediate roadmap for Okta, but it is definitely something that we use personally. So definitely something I'm sure that we're considering. But yeah, those are all great things to be aware of and make sure that you're securing. Let's see here. No other questions in the Q&A. I do have a couple of other questions though on my list. So we've talked about more generally, and of course how you've been able to lead with why when it comes to remediation. Is there anything specific to your team, whether it be continuous validation versus a manual engagement, or a more not as automated engagement when it comes to pen testing and security, that has really changed the way that your team works? Just kind of give me your explanation of how it's changed your workflows.
Sure. So one of the things to note is that we have two different sort of environments. We have our product environment, and then we have our corporate environment. We have a fully dedicated pen test team that goes through our product, does all those remediations, looks at those environments and everything. And they are very hands-on about everything. But it was not something that we had largely on our corporate side. And that was partially why I was brought on, and then why we onboarded with NodeZero, was to bring more of that, the pen testing capability to our corporate side, beyond just the, external engagements that we do, at least annually, making sure that we check off all of the, the governance things that we're trying to do with SOC 2 or GDPR or anything like that. It's kind of interesting because as I came on, we were also onboarding with NodeZero. So I don't know too much about the before, but what I can say is that it's become pretty integral now, right? To make sure that we're running through the pen tests, that we have a regular cadence. And then a lot of what I do is beyond, parsing through the results and then sending them off to whoever. I am doing a lot of manual verification, right? So if I find some IoT device that is allowing too many, that has too much permissions, rather than just sitting there with NodeZero and being like, well, I see it in NodeZero, I can go in there and manually hit it and verify it on top of NodeZero, and then be like, hey, let me give you the step-by-step that I went through, and show you exactly where the weakness is. But what NodeZero does a great job of doing is just kind of revealing them, so that I'm aware of those devices that I might otherwise have missed, because continuous pen testing, manual pen testing it can lead to a lot of fatigue when you're looking at 3,000 or 4,000 systems that are all largely identical, and you're just trying to find the one little nook or cranny that you can dig into. I think it can be a little hard, and having an automated system that can go ahead and do it for you makes life a lot easier.
Most definitely. Awesome. So I've got one more question on my list, Amara, but did you want to touch on any others from yours before we move on?
Yeah, I do have a question for you, Dustin. Help us understand your IR process and how that has improved, perhaps using tripwires overall.
Sure. So we've actually been lucky on our tripwires where we haven't had any incidents go off with the general tripwires, even though they've been placed and they're around. So we haven't had to test that. But again, one of the big things that we tried to make sure to do was plug in so that we get those immediate alerts. So making sure that it was plugged into Sentinel and then with the connector, and so it goes straight to Sentinel and goes straight to the IR team, so that they can run through the alerting. Which again, with the AD tripwire, like as soon as it went off, they were messaging me like, "Hey, is this going off? Are you expected to do this?" and all that stuff. But our IR process is I would say probably about as on par with most larger corporate companies that you would see, right? We have a dedicated part of our blue team that is ready to respond to things and immediately looking through, and then bringing in, a specialist for XYZ given system to help push through it. I don't know that we've not really been tested on the tripwire front, but I do know we have the tripwires deployed and I see them in there pretty regularly. In fact, I'm running one of our regular cadence tests, and one of the nice things is the notable events that it tells you is when it drops the tripwire, where it drops the tripwire, and what that tripwire is. So, I get to see that it's actively doing the job.
That's awesome. So one of my last questions, and this is a question for both yourself, Dustin, and our audience. As far as your security program, kind of what's next for your security program, whether it be a feature you'd like to see out of NodeZero or just your next project as a whole for improving your security program in general?
Yeah, I think with any company that's big and acquires, other assets, or spins up products and spins down products, it is looking at what your environment looks like after onboarding those new products or after offboarding or sunsetting old products. So one of the things that I know we're looking to go into is making sure that our network structure is built the way that we want it to, that we're doing microsegmentation the way that I know CISA just released a new paper, I think 2 or 3 months ago, maybe just a month ago, that talked about specifically looking at microsegmentation as a good way to build out your environment. So we're going through and looking at that. I know that's one of our major goals going forward. And that's again something that you can see in NodeZero that I'll be testing as we go along, right? One of the pen tests that you can do is you can run what is it? There's the
you have the segmentation test.
The segmentation test, yeah. The segmentation test, and then also running things like Bloodhound in your AD environment to see, what you can hop to from point A to point B. There's other things like the built-in, the regular pen tests include some of that segmentation. They also include the intelligent scope and the auto expand, which are things that I generally run. And try to, see if I start in point A, how far do I make it across our environment? And, as microsegmentation increases our, general sort of network security, that should become smaller and smaller to where I have to point and be like, no, we also need to target that. So.
Awesome. It looks like we have roughly 10 minutes. Amar, did you want to cover any closing statements or any other questions that you had for Dustin and the audience?
Yeah, I just, it's a good call. Let's see if the audience has any more questions for Dustin while we still have him here. Any open questions for Dustin in terms of what he's thinking about for his cybersecurity program overall? Questions for our team on what else is on the roadmap, but there's been a lot of really great, thoughtful questions this far.
Absolutely. Yeah, and as mentioned, we'll be covering more in-depth our EDR efficacy later on this month as part of our next webinar, but it'll be a great one to dive into, especially around some of the questions we had on, just making sure that you're detecting things like lateral movement or actions being taken on endpoints. Our EDR efficacy is a great tool for that. So be sure to stay tuned for upcoming webinars. Awesome. Did you want to close us out, Amara?
Yes, if nothing else, well, we definitely really appreciate everyone, your time today, and a special thank you, Dustin, for contributing on this wonderful session to kick us off for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Please keep the insights coming. If you have feedback, questions, one other thing I want to call out, we are more than just virtual. We're coming to cities near you. So please keep an eye out for user groups, work with your CSM. As always, we really appreciate your time, your feedback, and your continued support of Horizon 3.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure talking to our audience. And of course, you, Dustin, greatly appreciate you joining us for this webinar to discuss AD tripwires and your security program as a whole. So yeah, greatly appreciate you joining us today.
Yep. Thank you for having me on board.